Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the UK Centre of Excellence on In-Silico Regulatory Science and Innovation for our pilot phase virtual launch. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you. So my name is Professor Alex Frangi, and I'm professor at the University of Manchester and also director of the UK CEiRSI. And we want to acknowledge and thank in particular the support and the funding from Innovate UK Medical Research Council and with the support of the MHRA. So we're going to introduce you the agenda. So I'm going to provide some welcome notes in a minute. We will then go and cover what is the pilot phase and provide you an overview, both of the motivation and exactly what we're going to do during this phase. Then my colleagues will provide some organizational aspects around the collaborative tools and some useful contacts and resources that will be handy for you to be connected and to be engaged with the project as we evolve over the next few weeks and months. And then at the end, we will have a little bit of time for discussing some next steps and a Q&A session. So in terms of welcome and introduction, I'd like to mention that throughout the presentation and for the Q&A, you should submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A function, and we will address them. We also want to let you know that the session is being recorded so that this will be able, we'll be able to share it with all of you after the event, possibly during next week. And that if you have any queries in the next few days and weeks and months, there is an email address that has been created that is available to all of you, and that will contact you will be in contact with us in the team here in Manchester. So I'm going to introduce very quickly our colleagues. So Dr. Alice Arami is one of my collaborators here in Manchester, who has been very closely involved in the organization of this event and also in the support of the preparation of this proposal. And then Lara Higham is our project officer, and both of them will briefly talk at the end when we come to the second part of the talk. And as I said, my name is Alex Frangi. I'm professor at the University of Manchester, and I'm also a Royal Academy of Engineering Chair in Emerging Technologies with a focus on in-silico technologies. And we also appreciate the contributions from the Royal Academy in generating through their funding support for initiate and trigger this initiative. So before I go further, I want to summarize as well that this initiative of the CEiRSI has been put together with a lot of support from the Christabel Pankhurst Institute, which is the Centre for Health Technology Research and Innovation at the University of Manchester, of which I am the director. And I want to emphasize, without going into a lot of details in terms of its mission and roles, that we have a big focus on AI and materials-driven science and technology. And we are a challenge-driven centre. And one of our challenges, challenge number 3, is about bringing safer interventions faster and sustainably to the clinic and to market. And this is, in a sense, in the spirit of the UK CEiRSI initiative. So the UK CEiRSI is one of the flagship initiatives that has the support from our institute. Very briefly, we send the invitation to about 196 participants. So not all of them will be able to join necessarily today to the webinar, but they will receive the recording. And you have roughly their distribution. They're, of course, heavily UK-based, but also with collaborators around the rest of the world, with notable contributions from the US and the European Union. And also we have both a good representation from academia, from hospitals, scientists from the NHS, industry, and also regulatory and governmental fundings and venture capital funds. Okay, so I'm going to cover now a bit the overview of the CEiRSI and what this project is about. And I want to start by trying to explain why we need a CEiRSI and why we need it now. So one of the critical rules in medicine, the sort of the essential rule in medicine, called as a Hippocratic Oath, is that we shouldn't harm patients. But I want to go over with you with a number of challenges that we are experiencing in this sector that may actually put this rule in jeopardy. So first of all, any product through the life cycle of its development and regulation has to generate evidence of its safety and efficacy. And there is very solid foundations that have been developed over many years and best practices that to generate this scientific evidence, this regulatory evidence on safety and efficacy of the products, we use three primary routes: bench testing, animal testing, and human testing. Now, one of the questions that I have for you and that I would like you to consider is, are they actually doing what we expect them to do, and to what extent they're doing it? First of all, we know that all of these different areas have a number of limitations that I'm not going to go in detail today because I assume many of you are familiar with those. And also that in general, it's important to have good quality science. And it's great to see a lot of developments in terms of guidelines developed by a number of organizations, but notably through the Equator Network, that actually tried, and other organizations that are trying to generate best practices and guidelines about how science needs to be done, so that whether it is through bench, animal, or human trials, we do that with transparency and with rigor. However, despite all of these efforts, we need to revisit the reality, because there is a number of studies that over the years have shown that despite all of these regulatory efforts, there is considerable harm that is being done to patients. And the numbers here report numbers in the US, 83,000 medical devices that are potentially linked with 80,000 deaths that are potentially linked with failures of medical devices, and up to 1.7 million serious adverse effects in them. And this is in the US just over 10 years and just on 10 key devices. We have similar findings through the Cumberledge report that is precisely titled "First Do Not Harm." Just to give an example, a number of months ago, probably the last remaining left ventricular assist device has been taken out of the market after a number of recalls. And you may think that this is this particular device or a particular company, but it's actually a systemic problem across the sector. So looking just at the recalls in FDA from the first half of 2024, we have 49 recalls, and they pretty much cover the whole spectrum of companies in this sector. So this is not one company, it's a general challenge that all of the companies are facing at the moment. Thanks to a presentation that was done by my colleagues Tina Morrison from FDA and Mark Palmer from ANSYS, I present to you these two slides that I want to show you two key elements that show that there is also an ethical imperative in terms of patient safety. And this is that from every 100 complex medical devices that enter the phase of clinical testing, only 30 will end up seeing FDA approval, which means that about 41% of 31,000 patients that participate in those trials have been exposed to devices that remain at an investigation level, and they will never come into the market. And those figures for the pharma space is about 5 drugs every 100 drugs will undergo final approval, and that represents about 78% of patients on the order of 47,000 that will have been exposed to potentially harmful drugs or investigational drugs that will again never get to the market. So we need to think that even in the phase of testing those devices, we're putting a considerable amount of patients potentially at risk. The other aspect is the other aspect is that this process takes forever. So we take usually 12 years for a new drug, 7 years for a new device on average. So it's not necessarily safe and puts patients potentially at risk, is slow, is also very expensive. An average complex medical device is a 54 million endeavor if you get it right first time, but it's about $500 million if you take into account all the indirect costs and all the failures that you have on the face. And we surely should be able to do better, both in reducing the 44 millions and to get this 40, whatever that number is, as close as possible to the overall capitalized costs. And then there are also challenges connected with recruitment of patients in trials and the cost of that recruitment. So about a third of the cost of a trial goes into patient recruitment. We have about 80% of the trials that are delayed just purely due to patient recruitment or retention, and that more than half of the trials fails because of not meeting their patient recruitment timelines. And more importantly, we have not necessarily a good representation of the population in those trials, and there are certain populations that are critically underrepresented. Okay, about 44% of patients that participate in NHS studies drop over the past 5 years, which actually means that we're also potentially including an extra burden on the NHS system that doesn't necessarily lead to complete or fully developed trials. So it's not surprising that we have a number of sort of a stagnant system of R&D that is very expensive, that the healthcare to some extent is unsustainable in this way, and also that when you have a geography that is actually particularly positive about and has pro-innovation regulations in place, industry will prefer that over other places. And there is a potential benefit of being a first mover in this space to attract both investment from industry and also, and most importantly, to deliver the best possible products to patients in a faster and safer manner. And that's why the big value proposition here is how we reduce R&D from years to months, and how we can fail fast and fail early, so we can actually have the biggest possible return on the investment that both patients in lending themselves to studies and the government and the companies are doing in improving our therapies and our diagnostics approaches. So my proposition here to all of you, and the one that our CEiRSI wants to make, is that this priority of first do not harm equates to us to simulation first. And we want to see how we can go from those challenges to opportunities. There are other sectors where already for a number of years have transitioned to a less physical and more virtual approach to testing. I'm not suggesting here that these sectors are identical to healthcare, but if you consider, for instance, the aerospace sector, these are very complex systems. They are multi-scale, they're highly regulated, they're mission critical, and they have a considerable amount of uncertainties. And the more complex those systems are, as we show here in this diagram on the right, the tendency is more and more to be more on the virtual side rather than the physical side, while a lot of the components testing is easier to do on a physical level. So what computational medicine or in-silico medicine is all about is about how we use principles from engineering, mathematics, computer science, so from the new technologies to improve our understanding of disease, but also to improve our the treatment of those human diseases, and also develop better therapies. And that's what we understand by in-silico trials. So in-silico, because it's in computers, in silicon, as opposed to in vivo, in vitro, and they are fundamentally computer-based tests or trials that are used detailed prediction models on very controlled scenarios that try to bring at early phases of the development cycle and the testing cycle circumstances which are very close or as close as possible to what you will see when you go to human testing. Now, I'm not here to say to you that our proposal is that we should eliminate the conventional approaches of bench, animal, and human testing. We think that they still are very important, and there are certain things that we'll only be able to test in those ways. But what we do believe is that it's difficult for us, let's say, to understand how ethically we could argue that it's worse to use only 3 avenues of testing when we actually have a 4th avenue, which is the one of modeling and simulation. And let's remember that in the end, bench, animal, and even randomized control trials or any other form of trials are models themselves. But we are talking here about computational models. We think that in the future, what we will need is a way to integrate all of these sources of evidence into a profiles of evidence that will be proportionally tailored to the needs of a particular product, but also at a particular stage in their innovation process. So if you look at this diagram, in the horizontal axis, we have what is the life cycle of the medical products. And in the vertical axis, what is the number of problems that we identify and we fix in a certain design. What we are currently doing is this dark blue dotted line, where we tend to do relatively little testing early on in the phases of the development. And by the time we get to preclinical and clinical testing, things that can go wrong start going wrong, and that needs to be fixed at the later stage. But fixing that is very expensive and also has, by that time, put a lot of people at risk, as I explained before. So our proposition is that if there is a way to go to earlier phases of testing, in ways that we test more thoroughly, we can go with designs that are more optimized as opposed to remaining with a suboptimal design. And by the time we come to human testing, we do that as a way to have confirmatory evidence rather than discovery evidence of our potential risks. So is this working, and does it make any difference? Well, there are a number of studies that have shown that there is a potential to go, for instance, in medical products up to 2 years earlier to market, to reduce by a substantive amount the number of patients that were part of that particular study, that did have a concomitant reduction in trial cost. And by the fact of having gone earlier to market, we actually provided life-saving therapies to patients earlier, which has both benefits for patients, but also benefits from a commercial point of view. So what are the key components of in-silico trials? Well, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but just to give you from a flavor of what we are talking about in terms of technologies, there is methods to provide, to create populations of virtual patients and virtual participants. Also, technology to model and simulate examinations, like, say, imaging systems or interventions, like, for instance, the implantation of certain products, and also mechanisms to generate virtual readouts and virtual outcomes estimations for those studies. And there is also about creating an underpinning real-world data ecosystem that allows us to take data sets and create those virtual populations that then combine with data, for instance, from imaging for creating anatomical models, or data from wearable sensors to create evidence in terms of create virtual testing conditions regarding to lifestyle, physiological, and operational envelopes of those products. And of course, the products themselves have a certain design space that needs to be optimized. And each of these, a combination of all of these conditions, gives a virtual experiment that we can test. Now, where do we get all of the data to do that? Part of that will come from industry, from the the CAD models or the design or the product specifications, but part of that will come from large data sets and repositories, of which the UK is in no shortage of, and has in a unique position to make a substantive difference. And we welcome very much, for instance, the Sudlow review that shows why data is a sovereign asset as well for the government and a strategic infrastructure for the country. And we think that this can be capitalized in ways that also gives back to patients that have helped to sort of generate that data asset in a way that provides better care. But also, and this links with other priorities as well in the UK and internationally, there is also a digital knowledge ecosystem that underpins this in the form of models, simulations, data, but also access to data infrastructures and computational resources, which is what a lot of the technology that CEiRSI will have to work with other partners or develop, lies. So if we could revisit the future version of the Hippocratic Oath, I would call it primum non nocere secundum simulare. So it's still the key is not to do harm, but we think that the next thing that you should do is simulate everything that you're planning to do before you get to any physical type of experimentations. And this is where we get to the opportunity of the CEiRSI. So I want to explain very quickly the journey that we did over the CEiRSI, because I think it's important to understand that there is about 4 years work behind what we are presenting to you today. So there was a phase that was partly funded by Innovate UK KTN and the Royal Academy of Engineering. That was a grassroots effort that I'm going to talk a bit about. Then there was a discovery phase that was the first semester of last year. And then we put together this piloting phase, which is the one that we started on the 1st of February. But this journey will not end up here. Our plan is, our ambition is to develop a public-private partnership between academia, the NHS, industry, and government, to actually be able to move this field forward, because we think it is possible and is critical. And this is why we also welcome very much the Centers of Regulatory Science and Innovation funding call. And we are very proud of having been awarded, but also we anticipate that we will work very closely with the other 6 successful bids that are in other topics which are not in-silico technologies. And even this morning, I was having a conversation with the person that leads the cells and gene therapies regulatory science and innovation CEiRSI. And we have very close links with the CEiRSI as well in Birmingham on AI, and with the CEiRSIs in both Liverpool and Strathclyde that are more related to pharma. So this story started in before in 22, but we had a formal launch in March, and that was really quite an exciting opportunity. We got the then minister and people from Innovate UK. We had industry participation. We had involvement as well from all both the regulatory agencies from the UK, but also from the US and European agencies, because ultimately this is an international effort, because industry needs harmonized guidelines in the end of the day. And we are working very closely in our CEiRSI with 2 CEiRSIs of the US, particularly the one in Baltimore and in the area of North Carolina. We also produce a number of thought leadership documents, including an economic impact analysis that we produce. We also looked into the impact in terms of investment and sort of startups. We looked into we developed a roadmap with a community that has been downloaded over 3,000 times since the time we published this in September 2023. We developed also co-creation groups together with regulators, and we developed a sort of a document that established what are the principles and things that regulators, particularly MHRA, are keen for us to work with them and support them. Most recently, we have also found other ways to engage with, for instance, C-suite colleagues through this report that we worked together with KPMG, but also more recently in popularizing or making this accessible for a general audience through a podcast that we started, and it has over 1,000 downloads already within the first 3 months. But we also want to emphasize we are not alone in the UK in this. There's a massive work going on internationally, and here there is the opportunity to collaborate internationally from the CEiRSI, but also the challenge of not being left behind by not having the right capacity developed within the UK. So we also did a big work with the community. So this is summaries of a survey that we did with over 300 people, where we look at what are the barriers, what are the enablers potentially for developing, for what the community is asking. And also we looked at what are the stakeholders that we needed to reach out and work. And it's quite critical how the community thinks that actually working with regulators and policymakers is key. And that's what we have done, particularly over the last 1.5 or 2 years. So that led us to co-design with all of these stakeholders a way forward. And our proposal of CEiRSI is essentially that exercise. And we think that there is a great opportunity here to go from where we are today to a position within 2-3 years where a lot of these technologies are scaled up and used in a much more raw way than we are doing at the moment. Because these technologies are being used. It's not like they're not used at all. But what we think is that we should be more aggressive collectively and develop the techniques and the confidence and the skills that are required to take things forward. And this is essentially the 4 areas we identify needs, and where the CEiRSI that we develop is focused on, is positioning where this in-silico evidence is with respect to the other regulatory pathways, gaining confidence as well in terms of the trust on modeling and simulation from a regulatory point of view, and this comes around credibility assessment that we'll talk in a minute. We also identify there is a big shortage of regulatory skills and workforce, not only in the regulators, but also more broadly in regulatory affairs, staff within industry. And finally, that in the UK, there is no independent and technical capability that can inform the UK regulatory authorities on how to adopt these complex technologies. And that's why we welcome and supported the development of the CEiRSIs from the very beginning. And I would say finally from this last slide is that what we think is this is not something that any single actor can do on their own. And that's why we believe that there is a need to have a public-private alliance or partnership to deliver this at scale and at pace. So in doing that, we identify what are the impacts and the interventions that we need to do. And the creation of effectively the CEiRSI, we think will lead to be able to deliver and unlock the UK life sciences strategy, deliver the life sciences visions. We believe that it's possible to have within a 5 years time frames a number of benefits in terms of outcomes and in terms of impacts. I'm not going to go into the details of those, but they are described in some of the documents we wrote. And fundamentally, what our proposition is the creation of the center, the investment in it, and the ambition to co-design this with the Office of Life Sciences, the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and Departments of Health Science, the Department of Health and Social Care, all of whom we are in close contact and working at the moment. But we need to start somewhere, right? And this is what the pilot phase is all about, is how we do this first step in that direction. And fruit of all that, in that conversations with the community, we identified that the single point where we need to start is in developing more experience around credibility assessment, and not just experience in the sense of theoretical experience, practical experience about how we actually get it done, working with regulators, with approved bodies, with notified bodies, with industry, with academics, with the NHS, with patients and the publics, and other stakeholders, with investors. So this is what we came up by defining an In-Silico regulatory airlock initiative that is a safe space where we can have these multi-stakeholder conversations. And it's essentially focused on problem-based learning through very concrete exemplars that I'm going to talk in a minute, but particularly around understanding how current frameworks for credibility assessment actually work in practice. So with that, we took a steer from MHRA, so we identified a number of recommendations and advice that they provided to us. We also went and looked at the literature, but also the work that our colleagues in FDA and in the US are doing, and there's a lot of work in that space. But you know, if you look at the dates of many of these documents, they're a year old, and what is lacking is that going together and getting down into practice. So that's what led us to also think that what we want to do is take all of that expertise and develop together as a community a position paper on what we call model-informed evidence, and use these drafts tested on concrete case studies as a way to support our regulatory colleagues so that they can then take this through their internal governance process and potentially, you know, may lead to some guidance drafts as well in the relatively short term. So the whole of the next 12 months is essentially going to be summarizing this slide. There is going to be 4 work packages and 4 deliverables. A work package that is focused on that is providing an oversight, and it's an executive committee that is co-chaired with MHRA, but with involvement with NICE and the Health Research Authority as well, and a number of other colleagues. This will deliver the model-informed evidence position paper. Then we will have 10 case studies at least that we will go through in more detail in a moment, that will be overseen by a technical committee, and this will deliver a document, a report that will be a summary of our lessons learned through those. We also recognize that this is a socio-technical transformation. It's not just about methods and tools, it's also about understanding how this fits into the wider context, and that will be also addressed and delivered into a socio-technical report. And then finally, we want to see how this can be operationalized and delivered beyond the next 12 months into a sustainable operation that works to the benefit of everyone. And this is the third deliverable that we call Sustainability Committee that will deliver a proposal to government. I talked a bit about the deliverables before, but I want to talk about the pilots. So these airlock pilots are 10 airlock pilots, which have been co-designed and co-created with regulators, industry, academias, patients, and also not just within a purely local national level, but also with international collaborators, as much as, of course, the large participation of UK partners. So I mentioned a bit the pilots. I also mentioned that there are socio-technical committees, and I'm going to very briefly mention that we're going to be looking into regulatory governance models, harmonization and standardization, health system decision-making, so health economics, also looking into health, safety, and trust from the point of view of patients, but also data controllers. And finally, this aspect of skills and workforce that we think is really important. So the way we will deliver this is through a sequence of pilots that will be performed as open exercises, so everybody will be available to attend, but there is groups of people who are going to be driving each of those. And we are going to be looking at each of those technical pilots also through the lens of socio-technical considerations. And we will go from this draft that we have to the final versions of those deliverables. And then we have a number of forums that will act as advisors, as points of calls. Some of them are related with policy that is led by OLS, by the Office of Life Sciences, funders, which is led from Innovate UK, a venture capital observatory that will look at how we could inject investment to actually accelerate this journey. And finally, and very importantly, a public forum that will act as sort of witness of the whole process and keep us honest and focused on patient benefit and patient value. So we're going to have a number of webinars over the next 2 months that will help to provide opportunities for everybody to be a bit level up in those things that may find they don't have sufficient expertise or understanding, but also some of them will be oriented to generate conversation and dialogue between all of us. And this slide that we will share again with all of you is kind of a summary where it contains where all the various pilots will be. We will also maintain town halls to generate an overall feedback and update to the wider community. And there will be these awareness webinars and then, these various deliverables that I mentioned already before. So this is the list of webinars. The dates are still a bit being refined because, as you know, we only relatively recently got notice of the award, and we are trying to organize the availability of quite a few people. But we think that most of the webinars will start running as soon as in a couple of weeks and span probably until late of March, probably even a bit of April as well. And you will get all of these through our mailing list. Finally, in terms of the community and the roles, so I talk a bit about this, but I want to say what we call the community of interest of CEiRSI is, as a starting point at least, the community of all the organizations that providing support letters during the submission. So we had 85 letters of support from across the whole sector and different type of partners. The community of interest, however, is open. So if anybody is now hearing this for the first time and you don't know this is happening, by all means, reach out to us because we want this to be as participatory and as open as it can be made. But we thought it was important to show that there was a substantive base of support right from the very beginning.
It's absolutely lovely to see all of you and to see the community that's starting to grow. I'm Laura, I'm the project officer working with this group, and I'll just run you through some of the collaborative tools that we are pulling together to help everybody to work together as part of this pilot phase. Next slide, please. So the first collaborative tool that we'd like to use is Slack. It's a cloud-based communications app that I'm sure many people will be familiar with. These Slack community channels have been set up so that the committees, working groups, and pilots can all collaborate seamlessly with each other. If you're already a member of a committee, working group, or pilot, I'd like to ask you to set up a Slack account at slack.com and join the In-Silico UK Slack community. From that point onwards, we'll be able to add you into the correct channel for your role, so you can introduce yourself to your working group, committee, or pilot co-members and start to collaborate together. Another point of action is if you'd like to join a committee, working group, or pilot, please email us at the UK CEiRSI at manchester.ac.uk email address. Next slide, please. Another way we'll be keeping in touch with you is by sending out invites for webinars, meetings between committees, working groups, and pilots, and any reminders for pilot deadlines or report deadlines. And these will all be stored in the UK CEiRSI calendar. So just an action to look out for any meeting invitations and reminders that's going to be sent from our group. So for the document repository, this will be a collaborative space that's open for those in committees, working groups, and pilots to share any documentation and keep track of the projects in that OneDrive space. But it will also be available for the wider group to store useful documents and any recordings of meetings or webinars in one space. So please look out for an invitation to the document repository. We've also got quite a wide digital presence for the In-Silico community. So we have a web page, a library of publications associated with the community, a podcast like Alex mentioned before, and a LinkedIn group. But for the UK CEiRSI project as a whole, we've set up a LinkedIn group. This is like a hub for all useful information and announcements pertaining to the UK CEiRSI project. And that would be really excellent if we could see you all there in that group so we can stay connected on LinkedIn. And finally, for the collaborative tools, we'll be looking to launch a SharePoint site soon. This will be a sort of central hub for the document repository, the useful links and reminders for any upcoming meetings or webinars, all to be in one central location. That'll hopefully be a bookmark in your tab. And also just to run through kind of organizational aspects of getting in touch with any of us. So the best way to contact us is via the project management team. And we are best contacted through this UK CEiRSI email address, just to make sure that your queries are picked up and resolved by us.
So we are getting now to the final part where essentially from my point of view, what I'd like to say is in the next few days, you will get some material and also, keep an eye on your email for access to, some of the resources that we will be sharing with you. Sorry, just one second. I think I have a bit of feedback. Yeah, thank you. And what we would like to do now is to open the opportunity for questions. I see that there is already a couple of them that I'm going to start answering, but I would appreciate if others have any again questions or concerns, please by all means let us know. But the first question is from Rajat Desikan. So we will look. It has to do more about challenges for some partners to get access to Slack. We will look into that. We are mindful of it, but there is also practical challenges of using other tools like Teams. So we will look into what is the best way to make sure that everybody has access to the material. We have already looked into ways that that can be done. So Rajat, it would be perhaps good to follow up one-to-one until we resolve your specific one. And if anybody else has issues, by all means, contact us. Okay. With respect to the question from Matthew Kershaw about access to compute, I think it's a great point. So the short answer is for the next 12 months, for the pilot, we will not have problems because the way that we are planning to do these case studies is through is essentially as a sort of a thought experiment to run through what it will take to implement them. And one of the things precisely we're going to do, we have partners in the consortium that are specialists in high performance computing and computing infrastructures, because one of the things we want to do is to understand and identify the requirements, because that will be an issue in the next, from months 13 onwards, right? When we want to go from sort of the thinking to the actually getting it implemented and done. But this is something that will be one of those considerations that we will be looking at. And we have, as I said, partners in the technical committee. You will have noticed that the technical committee is quite large because some of the people sitting there there's one representative from each pilot, but then we have another 5 or 6 people who are not related to any pilot specifically, but they're there because they look at the pilot from a particular technological aspect or with a particular angle of expertise. So that's something that we and one of at least 1 or 2 of those experts are focused on HPC and computational needs and demands. Okay. So I hope that has answered that point as well. Okay. So I'll wait for an extra minute or so if there are specific questions that may still arise. Okay, so I hope we did a good job if it's to account for the number of questions we got. So it seems like things, I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions and a lot of things that we haven't fully covered with the webinar. It wasn't our intent today to absolutely sort of, cover every single ground, but we thought it was important to explain you a bit the history, the journey we did, to show you as well why we are doing what we are doing. I want to emphasize as well the amount of community work. I mean, I personally has been a pleasure to go through this journey over the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm so proud of the team and happy for all of us that we will be able to continue together. And I need to say that there is a lot of interest, both from academia, from industry, and from government, from the conversations I've had in terms of driving this agenda forward. And a proof of that is from 7 centers that have been developed. One of them is fully dedicated to In-Silico technologies. And just as sort of a summary, there is another 2 that are more connected to AI. There is one that is focused into pharmacovigilance. There is one into cell and gene therapies. There is one into manufacturing in the pharma space. And I think I'm forgetting one more. But all of those different services will work and talk to each other, and we will make sure that we identify how we can find sort of cross-linkings. Most of the other services are verticals, so they are actually focused on particular products or products domains, while one of the advantages of our services is the focus on methodologies, and in a sense has potential impact across the whole board. Although our starting point will be on both devices and pharma. Okay, so having given a bit more time to potential questions that haven't come up, so I will assume that most people are comfortable with the information given. Don't hesitate to come back to us. Lara, Ali, myself are going to be delighted to follow up with you and provide you additional clarifications, and just look really forward to be working with all of you. And once more, big thanks to all the consortium that put forward the proposal. And we represent all 4 nations in the UK, which is great. And also thanks as well for our funders, for MRC, Innovate UK, and the collaboration from MHRA, but also NICE and HRA for their commitment throughout this process and their support to us. And thanks finally as well for collaborators at the international level, particularly collaborators in FDA, and that have been really supportive of the work and have shown that it's possible to collaborate internationally in the science of regulations, if not in the regulations necessarily per se, or in the sense that those may have different constraints in different geographies, but at the science there is some common ground that we can all develop together, with an international focus and with a focus on hoping to harmonize the best practice that we have internationally. Okay, so with that, I'd like to close the meeting on time with 5 minutes back for your life, and wish you a great afternoon, and looking forward to work with all of you in the coming months. Thank you. Sorry, I think there's a couple of questions that have come in. There's a question from Amin about if there is an official plan to connect to other services in the UK. The short answer is yes. We don't know the exact form of that at the moment, because still we are awaiting feedback from the funders in that regard. But I think I'm sure there will be an intent to create a sort of a network of networks. And well, finally, Ginny from MSD, thanks as well for your encouragement as well. Well, have a great day.